So my name is Jenna Hayes,
I'm Kira Hellman.
I'm Vihan Gard.
and we explored the question, should there be more restrictions on purchasing guns in the US? We chose this topic not only due to the recent events of the mass shooting in Las Vegas, but also because of the fact that mass shootings are fairly common in the US compared to other countries, and yet our gun control laws have stayed pretty much the same. To prove this, look at the timeline of the past few years. There have been multiple mass shootings in the United States every year, all leading up to the worst mass shootings in our modern history. First in 2016, where 49 were killed in Orlando, then replaced in 2017 with 59 killed in Las Vegas. This continuity of horrible events leaves tragedy and sorrow with the families of the victims, and many feel that failure to take action by our government only deepens the wound in realization that these events will continue to take place as long as guns aren't further regulated. To come up with a solution for this issue, we first had to explore the positive and negative aspects of guns and gun control. First, we considered the ethics for the possibility of the positive effects of not issuing more gun control laws. One of the most controversial topics within the ethics of guns concerns the Second Amendment of the Constitution, which says that we have the right to bear arms. One quote from a gun enthusiast is, "Can't you realize that if we didn't have our guns, you couldn't have your printing presses?" Lots of people believe that our access to guns is a right we have in order to protect and provide for ourselves. However, the CDC conducted a study that found that less than 1% of all victims in non-fatal violent crimes reported using a firearm to defend themselves. An additional lens we explored was sociocultural, where we considered the negative effects of not creating more regulations for guns. Weapons play a big role in today's society. Obviously, the biggest issue surrounding gun use is how easy it has become for murder or suicide to occur. In 2014, the CDC found that violence involving guns killed almost 12,000 people and injured almost 60,000 more. They also found that in 2010, suicide was the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and half of these were accomplished using a gun. This statistic brings up another issue, which is the degree of effectiveness to which guns fulfill their purpose, to injure or kill. Because weapon technology is so advanced, most of the time when a person is shot, they will die. The motif of the alarming advancement in weapon technology carries through to the futuristic lens. As we consider the effects of guns today, we also have to conceptualize what guns will look like in the next 10 or 15 years. A good current example of technology advancements is bump fire stocks. These might sound familiar. Stephen Paddock used them in Las Vegas to kill 59 people. They are attachments to rifles that simulate automatic fire. They allowed Paddock to fire almost 90 rounds in 10 seconds. He purchased them legally because of a technicality concerning semi-automatic weapons. The thought of people like Paddock having access to more dangerous weapons in the future terrifies some people. Another aspect is the number of people killed per day by guns in the United States. Looking at a graph comparing the amount of people killed in other countries if they had the same murder rate per day as in the US, our country is far ahead of everybody else. Therefore, if more regulations are not implemented, the horrific number of murders will continue to rise and cause tragedy.
On the economic lens, on the con side, we argue that the revenue businesses gain by selling guns and ammunition could potentially decrease due to laws on enforcing gun control. A quote from the Global Risk Insight states that the gun and ammunition manufacturing industry in the United States earns collective annual revenues of approximately $13 billion, and that figure stands to rise in the years ahead. The problem is that this number would potentially decrease due to the laws on enforcing gun control. However, on the pro side, we see that by enforcing gun control, the taxpayers wouldn't have to spend lots of money on incidents related to gun violence. The Business Insider states that American taxpayers pay roughly $12.8 million every day to cover the cost of gun-related deaths and injuries. These costs include expenses on medical treatment, legal fees, long-term prison costs, mental health care, medical and disability expenses, emergency services, police investigations, and security enhancements. By enforcing gun control, many incidents related to gun violence won't be happening, which would therefore cause taxpayers to not pay such a large sum of money and would reduce the cost significantly. Artistic. Although there may be a connection on how gun control laws would hurt or help people through the artistic lens, instead, we decided to use the lens to show how art helps raise awareness of gun violence and help start discussions over gun control. A great example of this comes from an art exhibit on book known as Guns in the Hands of Artists. According to Amanda Market, a politics writer for the Salon, states that New Orleans gallery owner and exhibitor Jonathan Ferreira organized a clever art exhibition where he takes decommissioned guns, give them to artists to kickstart a discussion about gun violence in America. We can see that even through the artistic lens, people are using art to bring awareness to this topic. Political. For the political lens, we thought it was best to look at this topic from the views of the two biggest political parties, the Republicans and the Democrats. One observation we noticed was that each of the political parties values different sides of the ethical lens. For instance, according to the republicviews.org, the Democratic views on gun control state that we should strengthen our background check system and hold tighter laws on those related to using firearms. However, the Republicans' views on gun control are that although they don't have a fondness for using guns, they say that we should uphold the rights of our nation and that gun control infringes our right to bear arms.
So, examining the issue of gun control through the scientific lens, we found that the common use of guns has negative effects on people's mental health. The National Comorbidity Study found that 19.1% of people who owned a firearm reported having tantrums, anger outbursts, and had impulsive angry behaviors. It is estimated that 43% of American households contain at least one firearm. The common use of guns around children can have detrimental effects on their mental health. A study of rural 3rd through 8th graders showed that kids exposed to gun violence reported higher levels of anger, withdrawal, and post-traumatic stress. Children who are exposed to gun violence or traumatic events before the age of 11 are 3 times more likely to develop PTSD. Also examining this issue through the environmental lens, we found that the common use of guns has many negative effects on the environment. The U.S. currently has about 7,000 outdoor shooting ranges, and each range goes through about 1.5 to 20 tons of lead shots and bullets annually. This puts animals, soil, and water resources at a high risk of lead poisoning. Increased exposure to lead can cause paralysis, neurological damage, and even death. An example of this is the Remington Gun Club in Stratford, Connecticut, found that they had 5 million pounds of lead and 11 million pounds of toxic waste in their soil and nearby waters. As a result of this, the ducks had acute lead poisoning, and the mussels, clams, and oysters in the area had contained 10 times more lead than normal. The town had to ban shellfish harvesting because of this. Currently, the U.S. only has 5% of the world's population, but they contain 35 to 50% of the world's civilian-owned guns. Currently, firearms cannot be sold to people who are under the age of 18, people with criminal records, the mentally disabled, unlawful aliens, and people who are discharged from the military dishonorably. But as of 2016, there is no federal law banning semi-automatic rifles, semi-automatic weapons, military-style rifles, handguns, or large-capacity magazines. As compared to the U.S., many other countries have much stricter laws on guns. For instance, in Canada, you have to obtain a license that includes a background check and a public safety course. And as Jenna stated earlier, every year in the U.S. we face mass shootings, and yet we still do nothing to try and stop these. Whereas in Australia, only 2 weeks after the Port Arthur massacre in 1996, the National Agreement on Firearms Act was passed, which prohibited semi-automatic weapons, and now people in Australia need to have a genuine need to own a firearm. As a result of this, their homicide rates are much lower than the U.S. The U.S. homicide rate is 25 times higher than many other countries.
Our stance/opinion. So we believe that in some circumstances we do need guns for defense, for instance, if a robber were to break into our house. And we do agree that we need to preserve our rights that our nation was built upon. However, the guns being sold on the market are far too dangerous, and we need to limit these guns to, for instance, say, a pistol or a rifle, nothing like semi-automatic guns, which are potentially dangerous, as we can see in these many massacres. For these reasons, we agree that we should have stricter laws on gun control. Thank you.
Alright, so Vihan, give one specific way that your thinking changed as a result of Kira's research.
As a result of Kira's research, is that while she was researching, for instance, how it compares to different states, my thinking changed because of the fact that I realized that the U.S.'s gun rates are much higher. So then that led how I said the final stance had led that we should enforce more gun laws, especially since how she stated that the U.S. holds 35 to 40% of the gun rates. That I thought that we should enforce more gun laws.
And what was the strongest counter-argument to the solution or conclusion that your team identified?
So I think one of the strongest arguments was the economic, because of the large amount of income that comes in from selling guns. It was just a really strong stance against what we concluded.
Alright, thank you again.